This section of the video is going to be the same whatever text you are studying. It is basically the assessment objectives. If you don't understand what the assessment objectives mean for you in terms of how you answer a question, you're not going to be writing in a focused way that will enable you to maximize your marks. So what I've done on the next couple of slides is to simplify in plain English exactly what the assessment objectives mean. So on the slide you're looking at the moment, we're looking at the first two assessment objectives for literature. There are 4 in total, but the 4th assessment objective is only used on some of the answers, and that will become clear when we move on to the next slide. So first of all, assessment objective 1. In plain English, this is your ideas in response to the question. So whatever the question is, you need to be able to make sure that everything you say is shaped to answer the question as in a focused way as you possibly can. So you're not retelling the story, you're actually identifying what the key theme of the question is, and all the ideas that you pick up from the text are shaped to answer that question. Now the mark you get for AO1 is directly impacted by how sophisticated your ideas are. So if you have more subtlety, more complexity in what you're saying in answer to the question, that will get you a mark on a higher level. If your response is very simple, very simplistic, that will obviously limit the mark that you can possibly get. The other part of assessment objective 1 is actually supporting the points you are making with direct evidence from the text. So on some of the questions on the literature papers, you will have extracts. So the Romeo and Juliet question and the A Christmas Carol question, you will have an extract, so you will be able to get some evidence from the exam paper itself. You will also, though, be required to bring in evidence from another part of the text that isn't actually printed on the paper. But for the other texts where you don't necessarily have the question printed on the paper, you will need to memorize quotations to use as evidence. You do, however, get some credit for referring to evidence even if it's not a direct quotation. So if you are stuck but you can't remember exactly what a quotation is, it's perfectly acceptable to use a reference to that without quoting it directly, or to use individual words from the idea that you've remembered, even if you don't use the full quotation. But you've always got to support whatever you are saying in your big ideas with direct evidence. In fact, if you don't do that, the next assessment objective becomes invalid, because assessment objective 2 is understanding writers' methods. So you've offered your evidence, or you've offered the points that you want to make with some evidence, but you need to demonstrate that you understand what the writer's intentions were in the way they have used language or techniques or structures. Now, part of that involves an understanding of the connotations of some of the key words in the evidence that you've supplied. So you need to drill down and really look for the layers of meaning. It is much, much better to have fewer pieces of evidence and to explore them in depth than it is to have lots and lots of evidence that you just superficially attempt to explain. Because assessment objective 2 is really about analysis rather than explanation. So it's not just saying what the evidence means, it's actually demonstrating that you can take your analysis as far as possible. Part of that also, if you look at the final bullet point there, is using correct technical terms. So if you're referring to the parts of speech, do you know what an adjective is, what an adverb is? Can you actually identify the parts of a sentence? If some technique is being used, are you aware of the full range of different language techniques that might be used in a text? Words like metaphor, simile, personification, symbolism. Those are the kind of things that should be part of your familiar vocabulary. So whatever the text is that you're preparing for, you need to make sure you are covering all those things. Final main assessment objective for literature, assessment objective 3, is linking your discussion to the language, culture and beliefs at the time in which the text was written. So if it's a Shakespeare play, having an understanding what beliefs at the time were about the themes in the play and how they might impact how an audience at the time might receive the themes compared with a modern audience. So anything to do with the background to the writing of the text and the time it was set in, and showing an understanding that as a modern audience you might respond to things differently. So whatever the text is, I mean the example there talks about Shakespeare, but obviously if it's a Christmas Carol, so you need to know something about the Industrial Revolution and the effects of that on the world in which Dickens was writing. If you're looking at the poetry, each poem has a very specific cultural references and background, and you need to show some understanding of those ideas. Assessment objective 4 for the complete exam is only actually applied for the first question on paper 1 and the first question on paper 2, and it is a simple mark out of 4 for the accuracy of your use of language, so that how well you express yourself, but also things like spelling, punctuation and grammar.